Princess Nuria, the heir to the Vekri Empire, stood before the grand mirror in her private chamber, gazing at her reflection. The royal gown she wore was heavy and ornate, its colors reflecting the wealth and power of her family. Yet, in her heart, it felt like a prison. She hated the way it made her feel, trapped in the expectations of her people, her family, and especially her father, Emperor Lorvan. It was the same feeling she had whenever she thought about her upcoming marriage. The news had hit her like a thunderstorm. Her father had announced that she would marry a human nobleman, Jackson Blackwell. Nurja couldn't believe it. The thought of being bound to a human for the rest of her life was unbearable. The humans, to her, were a strange, wild species, noisy, emotional, and unpredictable. The Vekri Empire had ruled over its colonies for centuries, always guided by careful plans, logic, and order. Humans were nothing like that. Her father's words echoed in her mind. This marriage will secure the future of the empire. Humans are growing stronger every day, and they are our most important allies now. Nurja clenched her fists. It wasn't fair. Why did she have to marry someone she didn't even know? And why a human, of all people? She had always imagined her marriage would be a grand and powerful union, but this was an insult to her pride. She would not be forced into this arrangement. She was the princess. She had a say in her future. At least that's what she had always believed. Her father, Emperor Lorvan, had always been a practical man, never showed weakness or emotion, making decisions for the good of the empire, no matter the cost. But Nurja was not like him. She wasn't a ruler. She was a woman with dreams and desires of her own. And this marriage was not her dream. She had spent the night thinking of ways to escape it. Perhaps she could run away. But then what? Would be labeled a traitor, hunted down, and brought back in shame. That wasn't an option. Nurja sighed deeply, her chest tightening with frustration. There had to be another way. Just as she was about to turn away from the mirror, the door to her chamber opened. Her personal attendant, Lyra, stepped inside, her eyes filled with concern. "Your Highness, your father requests your presence in the council chamber," Lyra said softly, bowing. "Of course," Nurja replied, her voice flat. "I'll be right there." The council chamber was located on the highest floor of the royal palace, overlooking the capital city. The air in the room was thick with the scent of incense, and the long table was surrounded by the emperor's most trusted advisors. Nurja could see her father sitting at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. The moment Nurja entered, all eyes turned to her. Her father's piercing gaze met hers, and she could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't here to change his mind. This marriage was happening, whether she liked it or not. "Princess Nurja," Emperor Lorvan began, his voice low and steady. "I trust you've had time to reflect on the decision I've made." "I've thought about it, father," she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, "and I cannot accept it." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The room fell silent. The advisors exchanged glances, but none dared to speak up. Emperor Lorvan's face remained unreadable, though the faintest trace of frustration flickered in his eyes. "You cannot refuse, Nurja," he said, his tone firm. "This marriage is not a choice. It is a necessity. The humans are no longer just an ally. They are our equals now. We must forge this bond for the survival of the empire." "I don't care about the survival of the empire," Nurja snapped, her emotions rising to the surface. "Care about my future, my happiness, and this marriage. This arrangement with a human will not make me happy." "Nurja," her father said, his voice tinged with a rare softness, "you are not a child anymore. You cannot think only of your feelings. The fate of the empire depends on this union. You know what is at stake?" Naria's heart ached as she looked at her father. He was so certain of his decisions, so sure that this was the only way forward. But to her, it felt like a betrayal. How could he force her into something she had no say in? How could he ask her to marry a man she had never met, someone from a species she didn't even understand? "I don't want to marry him, father," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want to marry any human." The emperor's gaze hardened. "You will marry Jackson Blackwell," he declared, "and you will make it work. The wedding is in 3 weeks. There is no turning back." Nurja felt a wave of despair wash over her. There was no escape. Her father had made up his mind, and there was nothing she could do to change it. The thought of spending the rest of her life with a human, someone she couldn't even trust, was unbearable. But what choice did she have? Her mind raced, searching for some solution, some way out. But deep down, she knew the truth. There was no way to avoid this. The political alliances were too important. The Vekri Empire needed this marriage. That evening, Nerja was summoned to the royal hall to meet Jackson Blackwell. The human nobleman had arrived in the capital just hours earlier, and her father expected her to greet him properly. Nerja wasn't sure what to expect. She had heard stories about humans, how they were a rough, barbaric species with no sense of discipline. But she had also heard that they were resilient and quick-thinking. Would Jackson Blackwell be any different? Entered the grand hall, she saw him immediately. He stood tall, dressed in a dark formal suit that contrasted sharply with the bright colors of her own gown. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his piercing blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't look like the monster she had imagined. He was handsome, Princess Nerja Jackson said with a respectful bow. His voice was calm but firm, and there was a warmth in his eyes that made Nerja uneasy. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Nerja fought the urge to scowl. "The honor is mine, I suppose," she replied coldly. Jackson's lips curled into a small, understanding smile, but he didn't press her. Instead, he gestured for her to sit. "I understand this situation is difficult for you, Princess. I know that I am not the man you would have chosen, but I would like to show you that humans are not as uncivilized as you may think." "I'm sure you'll try," Nerja replied, her voice sharp. "But you won't change my mind." Jackson's smile didn't falter. "We'll see about that," he said softly. "I'm not here to force anything on you, but I'd like to get to know you, Nerja. I'm not your enemy, and I think we could both learn a lot from each other." Nerja wasn't sure why, but something about the way he said her name made her feel uneasy. There was a quiet confidence in him, a strength that seemed at odds with everything she had been taught about humans. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but one thing was certain: this marriage would not be as simple as she had hoped. Princess Nerja spent the following days in a haze of frustration and confusion. The marriage to Jackson Blackwell loomed over her like a storm cloud, dark and impossible to escape. No matter how much she protested, no matter how many times she argued with her father, the decision had been made. She had tried to run from it, tried to find a way to change the inevitable, but nothing worked. The Empire's future depended on this union, and it seemed like there was no other way. She avoided Jackson as much as possible. He wasn't exactly a terrible person. He was polite, well-spoken, and respectful. But there was something about him that rubbed her the wrong way. It wasn't just that he was human. It was his quiet confidence, his calm demeanor, and the way he looked at her as if he saw through the cold wall she had built around herself. Every time their eyes met, she felt a little more uncomfortable, like he was reading her thoughts, and that made her angry. She had been raised to be the future ruler of the Vekri Empire, to be strong, independent, and unyielding. The thought of submitting to a man, especially a human, felt like betrayal to everything she had been taught. How could she be expected to marry someone who was so different from her? Someone who didn't understand the weight of her responsibilities, the expectations of her people? As the days passed, her father's insistence on the marriage grew stronger. Emperor Lorvan was a man of duty. He never let personal feelings interfere with his decisions, and he expected the same from his daughter. He had told her time and time again that this marriage was necessary for the Empire's survival. The humans had proven their strength, their intelligence, and their resourcefulness. They had become an unstoppable force in the galaxy, and the Vekri Empire could no longer afford to ignore them. But Nerja couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time she thought of Jackson, she felt a mixture of anger and confusion. How could she possibly marry someone she didn't know, someone she had been taught to view with suspicion and disdain? One evening, after yet another tense conversation with her father, Nerja found herself walking the halls of the palace, her mind racing. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she needed to get away from her thoughts. She needed to clear her head. Her steps echoed through the empty corridors. The sound of her footsteps, the only thing that filled the silence. The palace was quiet at night, a stark contrast to the bustling activity of the day. She wandered to the balcony that overlooked the city, the lights twinkling below like stars. The view was breathtaking, but it did little to ease the turmoil. Inside her thoughts kept returning to Jackson. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he had looked at her the first time they met. It was as if he was waiting for her to come around, as if he knew that eventually she would see things his way. She hated that. She hated that he seemed so calm, so sure of himself while she was a mess of emotions. Why was he so confident? Made him think that he could change her mind? Just then, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Jackson standing at the doorway to the balcony. He was dressed in simple clothes, his usual formal attire replaced by something more casual, but he still looked out of place. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they simply stood there, staring at each other in silence. "You're out here alone," Jackson said, his voice warm but not intrusive. "Shouldn't you be inside with your family?" Nuria didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, to go away and never come near her again, but another part of her couldn't bring herself to do it. There was something about him, something that made her feel less alone. Even though she didn't want to admit it. "I needed some air," she finally said, her voice quiet. She turned back to the view, unwilling to look at him any longer. "I can't think with everyone around me, telling me what to do." Jackson took a step forward, his presence steady, but not overwhelming. "I understand," he said softly. "It's not easy being in your position. Everyone has an opinion about what you should do with your life. But at the end of the day, it's your decision, Nurja. It's your future." Her heart clenched. At the sound of her name spoken so gently, why did it affect her so much? She hadn't wanted this marriage, hadn't wanted anything to do with him, yet here he was, standing beside her as if he was trying to understand her pain. "I didn't ask for this," she said bitterly. "I didn't ask to be treated like a piece of property to be bartered for power, not a tool for your empire's ambitions. I'm a person. I have dreams. I have my own life to live. And I will not marry you. Not now. Not ever." Jackson didn't react the way she expected. He didn't argue or try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he looked at her with a quiet sadness in his eyes. "I didn't choose this either," he said. Quietly, "I didn't choose to be part of some political game, to be used as a pawn. But I am here, just like you. I will do my best to be a man worthy of your respect. It's all I can promise." Nurja felt a twinge of guilt at his words. How could she be so harsh with him, when he was only doing what he had to do just as she was? But she couldn't let go of her pride. She couldn't let herself fall for this man, no matter how kind he seemed, no matter how much he tried to understand her. He was still a human, and she still had a duty to her people. She could never let herself forget that. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling now. "You don't understand what it's like to be me? To have everyone around you decide your future? To have no say in your own life? You don't understand what it's like to be trapped in a marriage that isn't your choice, and I will not be forced into this. I won't." Jackson didn't say anything for a long time. Nurja could feel his gaze on her, but she refused to look at him. She didn't want to see the pity in his eyes. She didn't want to know that he might be right, that she was making this harder than it needed to be. "I'm sorry," he said. "At last, I didn't mean to make you feel trapped. I only wanted to get to know you, Nurja. I thought, maybe we could find a way to make this work." Nurja shook her head, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could make this work, that somehow she could learn to accept him, to accept this marriage. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. There was too much at stake, too much history between their two peoples. And even if she did learn to like him, even if she grew to respect him, it didn't change the fact that this marriage was still a political arrangement. And politics, no matter how much she hated it, would always come first. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted softly, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to feel, but I do know one thing: I will not marry you just because my father tells me to." Jackson stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Then we'll find another way, Nurja. We'll figure it out together. I'll wait. For you, no matter how long it takes, won't force you into anything. Narja closed her eyes, trying to push back the tears that threatened to fall. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to show weakness. Not to him, not to anyone. But in that moment, she realized that she wasn't as sure of herself as she had once believed. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: it wouldn't be easy. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the air. Nerja pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, trying to shake off the uncertainty that had settled deep inside her. The path ahead was unclear, but it was one she would have to walk, whether she wanted to or not. The days that followed were filled with tension, a constant undercurrent of unease that Nerja couldn't shake. Her father's expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. Every time she saw him, it was clear that he was becoming more impatient, more determined to push the marriage forward. Yet no matter how hard she tried to resist, Nerja could feel herself slipping. Torn between the duty to her people and the growing reluctant respect she was beginning to feel for Jackson. It was early morning when she was summoned to the royal council chamber again. Nerja had been expecting this. Her father rarely let a day pass without reminding her of her responsibilities. As she walked down the long corridors of the palace, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted to scream, to tell her father that she would not marry Jackson, no matter what the consequences. But deep down, she knew that such an outburst would accomplish nothing. Her father would not back down. When Nerja entered the council chamber, she saw her father sitting at the head of the table, flanked by his closest advisors. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that always accompanied important decisions, and Noria's heart sank when she realized what this meeting was about. She could already hear the murmurs of her father's advisors, their voices low and urgent as they discussed the future of the empire. It was all so impersonal. To them, she was nothing more than a pawn in a game of power. "Nerja, sit," her father said, his voice calm but commanding. She nodded, walking to the seat at the table that had been prepared for her. Her mind was in a whirl. There was no way out, no way to escape the future her father had set for her. Her eyes flicked to Jackson, who stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. He had been invited to this meeting, just as he had been invited to every other official gathering since his arrival. Nerja didn't understand him. He was calm, confident, and yet there was something about him that seemed almost out of place in this world of politics and power. He wasn't like the Vekrians. He didn't speak in the same way, didn't think in the same way, but he wasn't weak either. His quiet strength was something she had begun to notice in their brief conversations, and it unsettled her. She didn't want to admit it, but she was starting to wonder if there was more to him than she had originally thought. "Today, we discussed the final preparations for your marriage," Emperor Lorvin began, his voice steady as he addressed the room. "As you know, the alliance with the humans is critical to our survival. Their strength, their resources. We need them, Nerja. The future of the Vekri Empire depends on it. When you are the key to securing that future." Nair's stomach churned. At the mention of her marriage, she felt trapped, caught in a web of duty and expectation. It wasn't just the humans she had to consider, it was the future of her people. If she refused this marriage, it could lead to disaster for her family, for the entire empire. But still, the idea of being married to Jackson Blackwell, someone she had barely spoken to, someone who was so different from her in every way, it made her want to scream in frustration. Her father's gaze turned to her, and for the first time, she noticed the hardness in his eyes. "Nerja," he said, his voice lower now, "we have discussed this. You will marry Jackson. This is not just for the empire, it is for you as well. Your future will be brighter than ever, and you will be at the center of an alliance that will shape the galaxy." "I don't want to marry him," Nerja said quietly, though the words felt like a betrayal as soon as they left her mouth. "I don't even know him. He's a human. How can you ask me to marry someone who is so different from us?" Emperor Lorvin's face darkened, his expression becoming more stern. "You are a princess, Nerja. You are not allowed to think only of yourself. This is bigger than you. This marriage will strengthen our empire, ensure our place in the galaxy. Your feelings do not change the necessity of this union." Nerja clenched her fists beneath the table. She wanted to shout, to tell him that she wasn't just a tool for the Empire's plans. She wanted to scream that she was a person with her own thoughts, her own desires, but she couldn't. She was too much of a princess, too much of a Vecrean, to go against her father's wishes. But even as she tried to hold herself together, her gaze wandered to Jackson. He was standing by the window, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. There was something about him that she couldn't ignore, something that made her feel uneasy. It was as if he knew what she was thinking, as if he could see right through her. After a moment, he turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Princess," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too. But I want you to know that I am not your enemy. I don't want to force you into anything. I want us to build something together, something that works for both of us." His words made her feel a strange mix of frustration and hope. She hated that. She hated the way his voice seemed to calm her, the way his words made her feel like there was a way forward. She didn't want to think about Jackson like that. She couldn't. This marriage was not about her personal feelings. It was about the Empire. But even so, she couldn't help but wonder if Jackson was telling the truth, that he wasn't just here because of politics. That maybe, just maybe, he cared about her. "I don't need your sympathy, Jackson," she said, her voice colder than she intended. "I don't need anyone's help. I will do my duty, but it doesn't mean I have to like it." "I understand," Jackson replied, his gaze steady but not angry. "I never expected you to like it, Nurja. I only want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, even if you don't believe it." Her heart twisted painfully at his words. She couldn't let herself fall for this. She couldn't let herself believe that this marriage could somehow be more than a political necessity. But she had to admit, the thought of marrying someone who was kind and understanding, someone who wasn't cold and distant, was tempting. It was dangerous, but tempting all the same. Later that day, Nurja found herself once again alone in her chambers, pacing restlessly. Her father's words still echoed in her mind, each one like a weight pressing down on her chest. She couldn't escape it. The marriage was coming, and she was powerless to stop it. She was trapped between duty and desire, between what was right for the Empire and what was right for her. As she walked over to the balcony, the city spread out before her like a sea of lights. She could feel the wind on her face, a reminder that there was still a world beyond the palace walls. A world she was about to leave behind for a future she couldn't control. The thought of that future filled her with dread. She didn't know what it would look like. She was certain it wouldn't be the life she had imagined for herself. As the stars twinkled above, Nurja allowed herself a moment of weakness. She let herself think about what could have been, what her life might have looked like if she had the freedom to choose her own path. But she knew that was a dream she could never have. She was a princess, and her duty came first. Still, part of her wondered if there could be something more to this marriage than just politics. Could it be possible that she could learn to love Jackson in time? Or was she destined to spend her life resenting him for taking away her freedom? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers. Only uncertainty. Only the knowledge that, no matter what, her life was about to change forever. The days continued to pass, and with each one, the weight of her father's insistence on the marriage pressed more heavily on Nurja's heart. The tension in the palace was palpable. Everywhere she went, people whispered about the upcoming union. Even the servants, who usually kept their distance, seemed to cast curious glances at her. She had once been the center of attention for her beauty, for her intelligence, for her potential as the future ruler of the Vecri Empire. Now, she felt like a prize to be won, a prize she had no desire to accept. She avoided Jackson whenever possible, retreating into the privacy of her chambers, where she could be alone with her thoughts. Her father's words rang in her ears. "This is for the good of the Empire. You are a princess. Your duty comes first." But she could never silence the voice in her mind that told her she had the right to make her own choices, that she was more than just a political pawn. It was the night before the official engagement ceremony, When she found herself standing at the balcony once more, gazing out at the city below, the lights sparkled like stars, but instead of filling her with awe, they only made her feel more isolated. The cold wind tugged at her gown, and she pulled it tighter around her. Trying to ignore the emptiness that seemed to grow inside her, footsteps approached behind her, and without turning, she knew who it was. It was always him, always Jackson, quietly appearing whenever she needed to be reminded of the reality she could not escape. She didn't want him to be there. She didn't want to talk to him, but she also couldn't deny the strange pull he had on her. It frustrated her more than she could express. "Princess." Jackson's voice was calm, yet there was something in it that made her pause. "I thought I might find you here." Nerja didn't answer right away. She didn't want to say anything. That might encourage him, so she stayed silent, her eyes still fixed on the city. She didn't look at him, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of knowing that his presence affected her. "Tomorrow. Everything will change," Jackson continued, his tone softer now. "I don't expect you to be happy about it. I don't expect you to like me, but I do hope we can find some way to understand each other." Nerja turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she quickly looked away again. His presence was unsettling, and yet she couldn't quite bring herself to turn him away completely. He had this way about him, a quiet strength that made her feel both frustrated and curious. "I don't want this," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to marry you. I don't want to marry anyone, especially not someone like you." Jackson took a step closer, but still, he didn't touch her. He respected her space, something that only added to the complexity of her feelings. "I understand," he said. "But there's something I need you to understand too, Nerja. I don't want to be your enemy. I don't want to be a stranger in your life. I'm not asking you to love me. Not right now, anyway. I'm asking you to at least let me be someone you can rely on. You're not alone in this." The words hit her harder than she expected. She felt her chest tighten, as if a part of her, buried deep inside, was reaching out for something she hadn't known she needed. But she couldn't let that part of herself show. She couldn't let him see how much his words affected her. "I don't need anyone," she said sharply, even though she knew it wasn't true. "I've never needed anyone, not even my father." Jackson's eyes softened, and for a moment, Nerja could see the sadness there. It was strange. This human who stood before her, so different from the people she had been raised with, so different from the political game she had been taught to play. It wasn't just that he was a human, it was his entire way of being, something that seemed almost foreign, yet oddly familiar. "I think you do need someone, Nerja," Jackson said quietly. "No wrong does. No matter how strong we are, we all need someone to stand beside us. It doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." Nerja wanted to argue, to tell him that her strength was enough, that she didn't need anyone's help. But the words stuck in her throat. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling, didn't know how to make him understand that it wasn't just about him. It was about her entire life being decided for her, about a future she had no say in. "I don't want to be a part of this," she said, her voice quieter now. "I don't want to be a tool in a game that I don't understand." "You don't understand what it's like to be me, Jackson. You don't understand the pressure, the weight of all these expectations." Jackson nodded, his expression serious but kind. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to be you. I can't imagine the pressure you're under. But I do know what it's like to be caught in something bigger than yourself, to feel like you have no control. I know what it's like to be told that your life isn't your own, that your choices don't matter. And I promise you, Nerja, that I will never treat you like that. I won't force you into something you don't want. I will never make you feel like you're just a tool." His words, so genuine, so raw, made Nourish's chest tighten once more. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to acknowledge the truth in them, but she couldn't ignore it. There was something in the way Jackson spoke, something that made her question everything she thought she knew. Could he really be the kind of person who would stand by her? Could she ever learn to trust him? For the first time, Nerja realized that the feelings she had been trying to suppress might not just be frustration or anger. They were confusion, a deep-rooted uncertainty about what the future held, and perhaps a bit of fear. Fear of losing control, of giving up her independence. Fear of opening herself up to someone she had been taught to distrust. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust." Jackson reached out then, not to hold her, but simply to offer a gesture of comfort. His hand hovered near her arm for a moment before he spoke again. "You don't have to decide everything right now. We have time. I'm not going anywhere, Nerja, and I won't pressure you. You don't have to trust me all at once. Just take your time. We'll figure this out together." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. The first time, she saw not just the human man who had been thrust into her life, but a person who understood pain, who understood what it was like to feel lost. The thought made her heart ache, and she quickly turned away, fighting to maintain her composure. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't promise that I'll ever be able to trust you, but maybe we can try. Maybe we can take one step at a time." Jackson's face broke into a small smile, and for the first time, it felt like a real smile. It's one that didn't hide any ulterior motives, just a simple, honest expression. "That's all I ask for, Nerja. One step at a time." As he turned to leave, Nerja stood there, watching him go, the weight of her emotions heavy in her chest.
Oh.
She didn't know if she could ever love Jackson, if she could ever trust him completely. But for the first time, she was beginning to see that there might be something worth fighting for in this marriage. Something more than just politics and duty. The path ahead was uncertain, but maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The days before the wedding ceremony passed in a blur for Princess Nerja. She barely noticed the preparations in the palace, the glittering decorations, the bustling servants, the sound of laughter and music that filled the air. All of it seemed distant, as if she were watching from behind a thick veil. The closer the wedding day came, the heavier her heart grew. She could no longer pretend that this marriage wasn't happening. Tomorrow, it would be official. Tomorrow, she would be married to Jackson Blackwell, a man she barely knew. She spent much of the time in her chambers, pacing restlessly, unable to focus on anything for long. The weight of her father's expectations was always there, pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. He had made it clear, over and over again, that this marriage was non-negotiable. For the sake of the empire, she had to marry Jackson. For the sake of her people. For her father's legacy, she had no choice. And yet, despite everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The thoughts that had been swirling in her mind for days refused to settle. She couldn't stop thinking about Jackson, about his calm demeanor, his quiet strength, the way he had tried, time and time again, to make her see that he wasn't just another political tool. He wasn't just a man to be married off for the good of the empire. He was a person who was willing to wait for her, to be patient with her, to let her decide how she felt. It was maddening. Nerja had tried to push him away. She had tried to keep him at arm's length, but every time they spoke, every time their eyes met, she felt a pull, something deep inside her that wanted to trust him. She didn't want to trust him. She couldn't. He was still human, and she had been raised to view his kind with suspicion. Yet somehow, in the quiet moments they shared, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than just the political marriage her father had promised. The night before the wedding, Nerja found herself walking through the palace gardens. The air was cool, and the scent of flowers mixed with the soft hum of distant voices. It was a peaceful night, but Nerja felt anything but peaceful. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and uncertainty. She had spent so much of her life preparing for this moment, preparing to marry for the good of the empire. But now, with the day almost upon her, she was filled with doubt. What if she couldn't go through with it? What if, despite everything, she still couldn't bring herself to marry Jackson? She walked, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She knew the sound of his steps by now come steady, as if nothing in the world could disturb his composure. He had been following her silently for days now, always there when she least expected him. Jackson Blackwell, the man she was about to marry. Nerja, his voice was soft, almost gentle. You shouldn't be out here alone. The night is cold. And tomorrow is a big day. She didn't turn around. I don't feel like being inside right now, she said, her voice tight. There's too much noise, too many people, I can't think. Jackson came closer, but still kept a respectful distance. I understand. It's a lot to take in. I know this isn't easy for you. Nurja felt a lump form in her throat, and she fought to swallow it down. I never wanted this, she said, her voice breaking. Never wanted to be a part of this political game. Not ever asked for any of this. Jackson's footsteps stopped. She could feel him watching her, but she didn't want to look at him. She didn't want to see the sympathy in his eyes. She didn't want to hear him say that he understood, that he was sorry for her. It only made her feel weaker, more helpless. She hated that feeling. You don't have to apologize, Jackson said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. I'm not asking you to like this. I'm not asking you to change how you feel. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, Nurja. She turned to face him then, her eyes flashing with frustration. You don't get it. You don't understand what it's like to be me, to have your whole life decided for you. I've been raised to be the perfect princess, to be the perfect future ruler. My life has never been my own. And now you want me to just accept this. Just accept that I have to marry you, even though I don't know you, even though I don't trust you. Jackson didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, calm, as always. I understand more than you think, Nurja. I understand what it's like to have your future decided for you. I understand what it's like to be told that you have no say in your own life. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. I'm not asking you to love me right now, but I'm asking you to give this a chance. I'm asking you to take the first step, to let us try to build something together. Nurja felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that this was impossible, that there was no way she could go through with this. She wanted to tell him that she didn't want to be a part of this alliance, that she didn't want to marry him. But instead, she stood there, silent, unable to speak the words that were trapped inside her. I know you're scared, Jackson said, his voice soft, and I know you don't want to feel trapped. But you're not alone in this, Nurja. You don't have to carry the weight of this alone. We're in this together. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Her heart was racing, and her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Hated how he made her feel, how his words seemed to calm her, even when she didn't want to be calmed. She hated how he made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. About the future, I'm not ready for this, she whispered, her voice shaking. I'm not ready to marry you. I'm not ready to give up my life, my choices, my freedom. Jackson stepped closer then, his presence gentle but firm. He didn't touch her, didn't try to force anything. You don't have to be ready, Nurja. No one expects you to be. All I'm asking for is a chance to see what we can build together. Nurja felt her chest tighten as the tears she had been holding back finally started to spill. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by her weakness, but Jackson didn't look away. He didn't seem uncomfortable with her tears, just stood there silent, offering her the space she needed. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared of what this will mean, of what I'll lose. Jackson's expression softened. I know, but you don't have to face this alone. You don't have to lose everything. We'll figure it out together. Nurja looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time. She saw him not just as the man she was forced to marry, but as someone who genuinely cared about her. It didn't make everything easier. It didn't change the fact that this marriage was born out of politics, out of duty. But it made her wonder if there was more to it than just that. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't have to know everything right now, Jackson replied. We'll take it one step at a time. And so, with a heavy heart, Nurja made a decision. She couldn't change her fate. She couldn't escape the path her father had set for her. But she could choose how she faced it. She could choose to try to give this marriage a chance to see where it could lead. It wasn't the answer she had expected to give. But in that moment, it was the only answer she could give.